Welcome back to our panel discussion, Mitigating Insider Threats in Virtual and Cloud Environments, sponsored by HITRUST and Carahsoft, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Bill Ley. He's Deputy CIO for Information Assurance and the Chief Information Security Officer at the State Department. John Skidlaric is the Deputy CIO at the FCC. Tom Bayer, CIO of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Gary Buchanan is Chief of the Risk Management Division at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and Eric Chu, the President and founder of HITRUST. And I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And so we've talked a lot about virtualization. We've talked about continuous diagnostics and monitoring and the data that produces. And we briefly got into the cloud, but I think that's a good place to go because that's kind of the third big thing that is happening to government data and applications. And there are a lot of security implications for data in the cloud. And so, John, why don't we start with you? You said you were going to be in the cloud, but you're not yet.
Well, we do have some of our applications
Okay, so
in the
how do you
cloud.
prepare for that, and how do you protect what's there now? Sure.
So, in terms of what's cloud-based now, these are more shared services that we're leveraging. But we're probably going to have to move out of our current location in 2017 when our lease is up. And our plan right now is to have all of our computing infrastructure off-premise before we have to move. So as we look to where we want to go effectively with the lift and shift of our applications out of our physical space and into a managed service provider facility, I go back to what I said previously that one of the things I will say that we're doing is we're updating our applications. I told you we had some older applications, so we want to modernize them and make sure that we can make them as secure as they can possibly be as we transition them into the cloud. So part of it is good security engineering. The other part of it is practicing policies that we would practice in any situation. I think I understand the argument about the virtualization in the cloud possibly magnifying your potential risks, but I think some of the mitigation strategies still apply. So, part of it is I'll go back to blocking and tackling, if you will, and ensuring that you have a good proven service provider and going somewhere where you can get the service that you need at a price that's affordable.
All right. Gary, your take on the cloud, because, again, your data is all mission critical. It's all secret, a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And so what do you put in the cloud, and what do you feel safe doing?
Nothing. No, that is not true. So one of the challenges that we're running into with the cloud that I'll speak about is self-provisioning of services and servers and strong configuration management. As John was talking about, back to the basics earlier of sound security engineering practices and building security into a system to start with. That seems to be one of our largest challenges of it's much cheaper and more efficient to build security into a system than to apply it afterwards. And so if we can focus on that part of building our systems, our applications, so that we don't have simple SQL injection errors in our application code, and we don't have weak configuration management, I think that we can succeed and we can put anything that we need in the cloud. Again, configuration management is challenging when you're talking about hundreds and thousands of systems. And being able to be flexible and keep configuration management tight is always a challenge.
Yeah, Bill, earlier you said that because of cloud applications, sometimes you don't have the direct view into the environment the way the cloud provider does when it's platform as a service. So how do you, let's go over again a little bit how you mitigate that and how you decide what data goes there so that you don't get classified in a mixed environment, or what are the policies there?
We're working closely with GSA to ensure as we move into cloud providers for platform as a service or software as a service. The first step is we do an accurate data categorization. Right at the moment, there's no FedRAMP certified vendors that are authorized for high categorization or high impact security. So those data systems we're not going to put in the cloud. We're focused on low or moderate impact level data categorization. So that's the first step. Secondly, as I said before, as we move into a platform as a service, we no longer own or employ the sysadmins. Those belong to the private sector partner. So even though they're no longer Fed or State Department employees, we want to ensure that they've got the right security clearances and they've been well vetted by our private sector partner. A lot of it does come down to how you negotiate the contracts prior to going into these relationships. On our infrastructure side, we're going back and moving from a flat, unsegmented network to a segmented network. That will allow us to segment, again, by data, different levels of risk categorization or different security classes of service. If I want to plug into a Google or Amazon or Microsoft, depending on the type of data or applications that we're going to tie into, that will determine the security controls that we put in place as we interface with those cloud providers. And additionally, we're beefing up our data loss prevention software. Before, we were focused mostly on PII, making sure that Social Security numbers, other types of personally identifiable information do not get out. Now we're really ratcheting that up to include other types of data that we're putting in the cloud. It might be financial or mission-related data, not just PII. And with the State Department, we really have to pay attention to data sovereignty. While we're in 200 different countries, because of federal law or foreign government laws pertaining to the type of encryption software and algorithms that can be used, and the fact that we don't want our data to be taken over by a different country, we do try to emphasize through our contracting where the data actually resides, even though it's no longer stored necessarily under our control. So that one's a bit tricky, but we're paying a lot of attention to that as well.
So, Tom, how does that play out? I mean, the SEC holds data, submission data from many companies, 10-4 information and so forth, and yet it's their information, but it's also federal government information, and companies are multinational nowadays. So how does that all play out with respect to where data can or should be stored? How do you manage the whole cloud thought there with respect to especially data storage, but also applications?
So we have customers that look at our data all over the world. So in Hong Kong, there may be an investment advisor that at 2:00 in the morning is looking at federal information that's available on the EDGAR system. So our financial filings are very important and very impactful. People trade on that information, and it's important from an accounting perspective. We want to make sure that the integrity of that data is always intact, and because we are sharing the data all over the world, and that sharing of that data is in the cloud, and the edge routers are located throughout the world. We have have worked with our cloud provider to ensure that that data is secure, and we believe that they provide as compliant of service that they could possibly do in order to comply with the NIST standards and other things like that. We also have to make sure that none of that data is lost by internal parties or by the third-party cloud providers. Data loss prevention is very important, and also just the understanding of who's accessing the data, why they're accessing the data, and what they're using it for is very important. And so those are the things that we manage most. It goes always back to what is contained within the database, what is the application doing with that data, and how can we prevent security loss or data exfiltration.
And do the NIST controls extend to cloud providers in the sense that you have to look at, say, the financial stability of them,
Yes.
whatever the background might be of the principals of the companies that operate these clouds? I mean, there has been some issues lately for the federal government with cloud providers going bankrupt, and it can be expensive and also dangerous. So is that part of your thinking and part of the NIST control set there too?
It's very important, and also not only understanding their financials, their security posture, their capability, and we're very impressed with our cloud provider security capabilities. But in addition to that, it's important to establish a good security a service level agreement as well as a standard service level agreement, because you need to be sure that those systems are always available, always up, because that's what we would do if we were running and operating the systems ourselves.
All right, so Eric, if you take cloud and you take CDM and you take virtualization, you've kind of got a three-dimensional model for security, and most people, I think of it in terms of a kind of a flat situation. So what are some of the best practices for agencies and large organizations to make sure that in that three-dimensional area where it's not your infrastructure necessarily, or you can't even necessarily touch it easily if you want to, what are best practices for security there?
Yeah, no, all of these.
Where also I would add the insider becomes someone from the cloud provider too, and not just the agency and so on.
Exactly. No, these are critical issues for every government organization, and these are all in some ways new ground, right? Because you're not only talking about running your entire data center on a virtualized platform, but with virtualization and cloud, that data is highly portable, right? So, how do you ensure that somebody doesn't move that data, into the wrong mission, right? Data center, or classified data into an unclassified environment, right? These virtual machines are portable. They're drag and drop. How do you make sure they don't get connected to the wrong network, right? How do you make sure that, a classified virtual machine doesn't get spun up in Amazon? Anybody can do it, right? And part of it is that
with a credit card.
With a credit card, right? Not only is it portable, and that's a basic tenet of virtualization in cloud, but it's highly agile and dynamic. So you have lots of changes happening every day. How do you make sure that the right changes, the right actions are actually happening? And, paper policies are great from a law and kind of a guidance standpoint. But in the end, you need policy-based controls. You need automation for things like configuration management, and to make sure that the right security policies are being enforced in the systems that they're going into. And one of the topics that we started touching on is how do you control where your data goes and how secure your data is, given the portable nature of cloud. And it's something that is top of mind to us. And we just launched an initiative with Intel around what we call boundary controls, where we can ensure that your virtual machines, one, run on trusted hardware, all the way down to what's called the TXT-enabled TPM module of the chip itself, that it only runs in specified locations that you authorize. And number three, that you encrypt the data within your virtual machines, and you only decrypt it if it's being powered on in that specific location that you're authorizing it to be in. And these are things that not only is it important for government agencies to enforce in their own environments, but it's important for them to ensure that their cloud providers are following those same best practices and choosing cloud providers that implement those type of tools, right, that automate those security controls. Because in the end, even if you have a well-negotiated SLA, the person who owns liability at the end, if a breach were to occur or if something bad occurred, is the company or the organization, right? It's not the cloud service provider.
Correct, yes. I think in the government they call that which belly button do they push. And Gary, with information that is deployed around the world for war fighters and for other operatives in the federal government, and what's your strategy for deploying data in different locations, classified versus unclassified?
Well, the strategy has got to be requirements up front that clearly outline the security engineering that's going to be built into a system. And then on top of the engineering that goes into the build, you have to think about your attribute-based access controls. And more importantly, what I'm finding more and more in the community as we centralize things into a cloud is metadata tagging of data. So that not only do you know what the data is, you know who has access to it, and you can confirm through our ABAC systems who has actually touched what piece of data and who's tried to touch pieces of data that they shouldn't. So as we deploy our systems around the world, we're really looking to build them right the first time, to know not only what the data is, who touches it, and who is trying to touch it that shouldn't.
Okay, and Bill, we'll give the last question to you. When you're dealing with cloud providers and your own data centers, and there's all this continuous monitoring going on, and you make sure that the logs tell you what you need to know and what might have gone wrong, is there ever a spot where you kind of stop and look at the systems as a whole and say, is this exactly what we want to be? In other words, backing up and not looking at the details so much, but making sure there's coherence at the macro level.
Absolutely. It can't be a set of stovepipes of excellence, as we call it. There has to be a systemic approach for holistic security and risk-based decision-making. The problem is you can only step back and admire your work for about 30 seconds because the world continues to move on and new requirements come in out of the blue that you had not planned for. At the end of the day, it really comes down to how you're going to architect and build for capability. You've got to have, as we move into a broader cloud-based environment, outstanding private sector partners that understand the needs of the government and can meet our mission requirements.
All right, good place to end on. I'd like to thank our guests today. They are Bill Lay, Deputy CIO for Information Assurance and the Chief Information Security Officer at the State Department. John Skladaric, he is Deputy Chief Information Officer at the FCC. Tom Bayer is CIO at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Gary Buchanan, Chief of the Risk Management Division at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And Eric Chu, Co-founder and President of HITRUST. I'm Tom Temin, Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
On behalf of HITRUST and Carahsoft, thank you for joining us for this informative discussion. You'll be presented with some polling questions as you leave the webinar to help us improve future sessions. We appreciate your feedback. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you for you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate for this webinar should receive it in the next 2 weeks. Be sure to register for upcoming webinars from the Capital Exchange. Look for upcoming sessions at fedinsider.com/events. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.